up live. So Chauncey, kick us off.
All right. Hello and welcome to the MCEC Fam Show. I am Chauncey Williams, the coordinator of student success here at MCEC, which stands for Muskegon Community Educational Center, the place where the center of your child's education is magnified in the collaborating community. Our focus here at MCEC is community involvement, careers, social emotional learning, and nutrition. What's up, PK? What or who do we have on the agenda today, fam?
Now, I'm going to say that it's a mouthful. It's Dr. Kimberly Ann Harris, Professor of Philosophy at Marquette University in Wisconsin. Let me say that one more time. Dr. Kimberly Ann Harris, Philosophy Professor at Marquette University. We're blessed and, again, highly favored to have someone who I remember as a 10th grader who is now taking Hegel and, what I understand, critical race theory to new heights. I imagine in the near future, we'll get to see her book. I know that I have to believe she's probably working on one. So we have Dr. Kimberly Ann Harris, and we're lucky and blessed to have her. So, Chauncey, fire away with the question. She said we can put her on the spot.
Wow. So my job here is career readiness and just trying to help the kids through culture interviews, build the mindset and the doorway to open that expectation of what they want to be in the future. So when we talk about Dr. Harris, when did you imagine this thought of yourself being Dr. Harris, which is congratulations also, and thank you for being with us today and sharing your time. But we call it happenstance here. When did you imagine that education could potentially help you become a doctor in the space you're in today? And what were the series of events that you're like, oh, I can go a little further, or I'm passionate about this. I feel like my purpose is tied to this. When did that happen for you in a small increment? Like the first instance of it, they're like, I can do this.
That's a really good question. I've answered this question, I think, different ways in the past. But the first thing I'll say is I've probably been called Dr. Harris more times on this interview really than my entire time of having my PhD. Actually, I think I got my PhD in 2018. I got it from Penn State. I got my bachelor's degree in philosophy and African-American history from Michigan State.
Oh, so let me ask you this question. Did you have Dr. Hines?
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
okay.
Of course.
You are better.
She is
tested in. Okay.
Yeah, she's another level.
Wow. Okay, keep on talking now.
Yeah, so I breathed the same air as her for a class or two. But yeah, so I was actually, when I went to college, I will say this, I think my intellectual interest started before I went to college. Actually, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Faith Grossbeck or Grosshoitz. I think
Faith Grossbeck. She graduated with me.
Yes. She actually, I was a junior, and I was actually in Corey Lohman's English class. And she made this announcement that Faith was putting on this essay contest. And the essay contest called or prompted for you to think about the meaning of injustice. And I was like, oh, I feel like I can say something about injustice. But anyways, I ended up writing and winning the essay contest. And I wrote about my grandmother. And I wish I would have kept this essay, but the essay was about, sometimes when we talk about injustice, we think about these huge national things that happen to people, which of course are really important. But I was thinking about the day-to-day kind of injustices that people face. And she was a perfect example of that and what it means to go through life and to continue to go in the face of a lot of adversity. And so that's what the essay was about. And I won the essay contest. And then the prize was that I got to go to Washington, D.C. with Faith. And we sat in on a court case about women's reproductive rights. So that was the first time I think I thought about being a writer professionally. I was like, oh, because I've always loved to read. Everyone in my family points this out, like, you were always somewhere in a different world reading. So I thought for a very long time that I was going to be a writer, and I am a writer, of course. I just I hadn't thought about philosophy specifically until I was in college. Yeah, so I wanted to write actually biographies of everyday people. Actually, that's what I thought I wanted to do for a long while. And I sort of stopped writing for a while because I had got this narrative in my head. I was like, well, you know, this is 17-year-old me. I'm like, you don't have enough life experience to write anything meaningful or to really to be able to see what's interesting about other people's lives, which I think was definitely true. But yeah, so I went to college. I was undeclared for a long time in major. And I was, to speak to Chauncey's question more directly about, you know, a series of events that occur, I sort of went through this existential crisis in college because, I don't know, I got dumped by a boyfriend or whatever. And I was like, what is my life going to become? Anyway, so I decided to take a philosophy class. I decided to take a philosophy class. It was Intro to Social and Political Philosophy. And it happened to be taught by an African-American philosopher, Dr. John McClendon, who's an Orthodox Marxist. And he was very stern on all of us in his class. But yeah, so I took his class. I loved the class. We mostly read Marx and post-Marx theorists, but we did for a bit talk about Marx's critique of Hegel, and that's sort of where that started. But anyways, Dr. McClendon said to me at the end of the course, he's like, you know, I think that you might be good at this, so you might consider going on further. And so I became his research assistant, and I helped him collect the research for his book that he was writing at the time. And I've been in philosophy ever since.
So my question is, and I'm going to put this out there, and I'm begging the question, so I'm sorry for doing that. But a lot of people say when you go to college, you should choose something and just stick with it. And things like philosophy or the study of religion or all those other topics, they're really neat, but you can't really get a job with it. Mm-hmm. Now, clearly, you have a job and you inevitably are or will soon become a published philosopher. Tell us about that transition a little bit, about getting into philosophy and what kinds of paths that's open for you.
You know, I think, well, to just talk logistically about, I mean, college is very expensive in this country. It's really unfortunate, and it really is a disservice. But given that, I do think teaching at a private institution, students are, and their parents are concerned about what majors they have, what course of study they're going to take up. Now, here at Marquette, actually, philosophy and theology and literature are required courses for freshmen. You have to take those foundation courses, which of course I love because I think everyone should take philosophy. Now, I think there's a false narrative about what you major in college and its ability to get you a job. Most people work in fields that have nothing to do with what they majored in college, for example. College, I do think that you should spend a lot of time in college really considering the things that interest you. Now, there are major, like philosophy in general, there's not a course or a job or field of study or field of work professionally that I do not think critical thinking, the ability to put together arguments and deconstruct arguments, the ability to think discursively could not help you be better at. And so I like to encourage double majors in philosophy. Like we have a lot of double majors here in philosophy and cognitive science, for example, philosophy and biology, philosophy and political science. So yeah, I would encourage people to a double major, but definitely consider philosophy because philosophy majors score highest on all standardized testing. That's always my pitch too. It's a good pitch, right?
That's a very good pitch. And I was lucky and blessed enough, the Harvard of the Midwest, Hope College, also requires folks to take more literature, philosophy, and religion than, say, for example, that other university in Ann Arbor as an undergrad.
Oh,
No.
did you go to Hope?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, excuse me.
I had to put that little dig in.
Do people call Hope the Harvard of the Midwest? Stop it.
No, I say that just to be facetious. So along the way, Kimberly, who have been some people that have helped light your path or push you in a direction or whatever? Who are some of those people? Because people don't do it alone.
No, of course not. There's been a lot of people. I think in high school, Coach Fishel, I was on the cross country and track teams. I do think that being a part of those teams showed me endurance, what that means. And he's just a very vibrant and interested in teacher in general. And so he was very involved. Mrs. Davis, I think she's retired now, right?
Mrs. Faye Davis?
Yes.
Yes, she is. Yes, she is.
I was her teaching assistant, and she would always give me all these, just life tips, unsolicited advice usually. But it was very good advice. It was very good advice. And I always looked up to her because I just thought she was just so classy. I'm like, this is the way we should all try to be in the world. And also just the way she handled the students and things like that. I just really admired that. Of course, there was Faith because of what I was saying, but all of my teachers, and especially in high school, of course, my family, my peers that I went to graduate school with have had a lasting effect on me. They're some of my closest friends still to this day. We read each other's work. My dissertation advisor, Robert Bernasconi, he's had a huge impact on my life, not just because he sort of recruited me when I was an undergraduate, and he's like, if you want to go to graduate school in philosophy, you should consider Penn State. And I said, well, why should I consider Penn State? And he said, well, if you want to do African-American philosophy, then there's not many places you're going to be able to do that. And he was right. And I worked with him for my 6 years I was in graduate school. We still work together, actually. We edit a journal called Critical Philosophy of Race. And of course, he reads all of my work, but he spent so much time with me as a graduate student, helping me with my writing, just teaching me the tricks of the trade. I mean, I admire him so much, his style. He's English, old English guy. So he's very funny. He's that dry English humor. But anyway, so I really admire him. And he, in some ways, I mean, I've never said this to him, but he acted as my parent in some ways. Sometimes people say that about the graduate advisee relationship. It's a parental relationship. It's sort of true. But I lost both of my parents. And so I lost my mother in 2017, and I was sort of in the middle of graduate school. And he really held me in a space where I could still do my work and help me improve and things like that. And I think I thank him a lot for that to this day.
I wanted to say this, Paul. We did a career fair earlier with our students, and we were sharing what you just shared. When you go to environments that push you to the next space, you find people that don't power hoard. The people that you were around saw your potential, saw you were in a transition. Because I'm without both my parents too. And I remember my mom passing when I finished my degree, and I was just like, I had to do it. But then these other people step in these spaces and they look at you and they see your drive. Even if you don't have the skills, they're like, Chauncey, this would be great for you. This would be good for you. And they'll walk alongside you. And we're trying to tell our students to pick an alternative narrative when it comes to your life. Don't be scared to go to the Penn States, the Michigan States, the Hopes, to the construction trades. Walk into those spaces because you're going to run into people that are influential and affluent, and they're going to look at you and say, hey, you remind me of myself when I was at that stage.
Yeah, and to say to that, to speak to that, Chauncey, I think you're absolutely right. But I was thinking about this not too long ago because I was giving advice to someone else. But if you are pushing towards some kind of goal and maybe you don't have all the resources that you need to get there, and that could be resources in terms of mentoring, financial resources, time resources, whatever it is, there is someone who's going to see you and see your efforts. And there are people that will help you if you continue to push in the direction that you want to go. It might take longer than you expect sometimes. That's definitely true. But people see you and they will help. So yeah, you're absolutely right to seek out those types of relations. The other thing I would say is be open to sometimes your mentors and the people that you're going to get resources from aren't going to look the way you think they're going to look.
Ooh,
you know what I mean?
Yes, I know what you mean.
Yes, I learned that later. I'm like, in my mind, I had, this person should be mentoring me or whatever. But, life just turned out differently. I'm like, no, different people are mentoring me. I'm sort of going through that transition right now as I'm working on the book, and I'm trying to find people to comment on my work. And it's changing a little bit who those people are going to be who are helping me through the project. And I'm embracing it. I'm definitely embracing it. So I think you're right. Just hang in there, stay in there. Nothing comes overnight. Nothing that is worth pursuing is going to come overnight anyway. But I do encourage people to stay on the path because it's going to fall into place in a very unexpected way usually.
So I'm going to work very hard not to power hoard myself. And I'm going to say, Tom or Brent, do you have a question for Kimberly? Because I have like 100. I know she can't answer all of them, but I'll cede the floor. I'll be a good Lutheran using Robert's Rules of Order.
Yeah, Marquette, Wisconsin's an interesting place. How'd you end up there?
Well, they gave me a job here, and so I was like, okay, I'll come. But I was actually excited to come to Milwaukee because Milwaukee has a very interesting population here. It has a huge African-American community to the north and a huge Latinx community to the south of the city. A couple years ago, it was actually called Milwaukee, the most segregated city in America. So as a person who works on philosophy of race, it's an interesting space to think about race from. So I came here, they offered me a job. My colleagues are fabulous. They're really supportive. And they're really looking to diversify the field of philosophy. Because as you guys could imagine, there are not many people who look like me in philosophy. Actually, there's only around 40 to 50 Black women in philosophy, professional philosophy. And there are, to give you sort of a sense of the scope, there are 10,000 members of the American Philosophical Association. So it's a very small number. I'm definitely happy to be here. And do you know much about Milwaukee?
No, the only thing that I know is I love music. And so when Summerfest was a thing, pre the stupid pandemic, we would go and we would catch concerts, and that was a great time. And that's really my scope of it.
Yeah, it's great here. Actually, Vogue did a kind of a cover of Milwaukee, the food scene here. It gets overlooked, but it's one of the best food cities, I think, in the country. And I eat a lot in a lot of different places. But yeah, so I would suggest that to come to Milwaukee for the food, not just the beer and the cheese, although those things, you know, the Green Bay Packers are also a big thing here. My father was a lifelong fan of the Packers. So that was a lot culturally to get used to. People take that stuff very seriously here.
So do you indulge in the Germanic wild game platters that used to be offered in some of the old school restaurants there?
No, I can't say that I have partaken in that. Yeah. What is a platter of meat and cheese?
Well, there used to be these old German restaurants downtown, and you could go and get the game platter, and it'd be all these different things. And I remember as a little boy, we used to go there, you know, once a year, and thinking, can't we just go to McDonald's? I'd like a cheeseburger and French fries. But that, you know, back then, now I'd just be a glutton, but that's a different story.
No, I like tapas restaurants. Nice. Which is sort of unfortunate because, you know, you go and you get the small plates, and then before you know it, you spent $150 and you're still hungry. But yeah, I love tapas. And the well, not just Mexican food, but the Latin food here is really great too. It's really great. There's a couple soul food restaurants. There's Daddy's, which is at the north of the city. That's really good too.
Now, do they have turkey knuckles in Milwaukee?
You know, actually, now that you bring that up, I never eat turkey knuckles unless I'm at home in Muskegon, because I don't want anybody cooking my turkey knuckles. And contrary to popular belief, you can mess up turkey knuckles. Yes, and I've seen it done before. Which was surprising. But I was FaceTiming with my cousin last week, and I was like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm cleaning chitlins. I'm like, what? And then I got it on my mind. I was like, should I go get a bucket of chitlins to make? And my sister was like, no, that's disgusting. But I love them.
Then should you ever be back in the good old ski again, we will take you to a place called Soul Filled Eatery, and their turkey knuckles and greens are so good that we'll all have to duck in the car before you slap us.
Wait, where is this place? Why have I not heard of it?
It's on Glade, down the way from the Hearthstone. It's relatively new.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But she puts red bell pepper and jalapenos in her greens. But her turkey knuckles. The turkey knuckles are just amazing. None of the fat, none of the gristle. But I digress. I'm sorry, I can't help myself. Tom, I'm sorry, I'm power hoarding again.
Yeah. You know, speaking of businesses in Muskegon, I was on Facebook, and I think it's called Isis's Candy Shop. Have you heard of this? It's a 10-year-old girl who started this little candy shop or whatever. And I was thinking, when I'm home soon, because I'm going to go to my cousin's graduation, it's like, I've got to stop into her candy shop, because I was so impressed.
Mm-hmm. She has a little trailer, and I know that her parents have been working with her. You know, watch her be on Wall Street someday.
I know. That's why I'm like, your horizons are wide open.
Absolutely. Tom, do you have a question for Kimberly?
I don't. I'm fascinated by the story and the narrative. So thank you for sharing, Kimberly.
So I do have another question before Chauncey, because Chauncey, I can unmute faster than Chauncey. Let's assume that it's fall 2021, Kimberly, and we've gathered every freshman young lady into the Austin Auditorium. It is the Austin Auditorium, right? Yeah, Brent? So they're all there, and we have a guest speaker, and her name is Dr. Kimberly Ann Harris, and you get to deliver the opening year's message to them. What 3 to 5 things would you say to 250 14 and 15-year-old young ladies in the city of Muskegon?
Sounds like a job interview question. 3 to 5 things. They're freshmen, incoming freshmen. Well, the biggest thing I would say, I think, or my main message would be, I think there's a lot of talk of follow your dreams or whatever. But I think when you're a freshman in high school, you don't know what your dreams are precisely yet. And so I would encourage them to see a variety of different people living their lives, not necessarily living their dreams or whatever, because, your dreams will change. My dreams are changing what I want to do and what I want to be, who I want to influence. And so that's what would be my big message, because there's been so much about my life that has come, good things, I should say, that has come via just being open to new people and to new experiences, and to put myself in spaces that I wouldn't normally be in. I think in some ways I come from a very insular family. Like, I grew up on 6th and Mason. All of my aunts and great aunts, we all live in like a 1 mile radius, all of our cousins. So when I left home, I was actually quite depressed when I left home, because that all changed very quickly. So I had to figure out, I was like, okay, well, there's no family here. You got to make a family. Mm-hmm. You got to find new friends. You know what I mean? And so that's what I would encourage, that kind of openness. And traveling, very important, I think. And not, people post on Facebook like these glamorous trips, obviously. But some of the trips that I've taken have been to places that aren't necessarily glamorous, but I've learned so much. Like, I went to Palestine in 2015.
Nice.
Yeah, and I was in the West Bank, and it changed my life. Jerusalem. But it was mostly because of the people that I got to talk to while I was there, and different kinds of lifestyles I've gotten to see. So that's what I would encourage, rather than a course of studies specifically. The other thing I would emphasize is, school is hard, and it's harder for some more than others. But I think if you can find something that you're interested in about every class that you take, then that's going to get you through a lot. And that's how also I approach dealing with difficult material, because sometimes some of the things that I work on are very difficult, like the Hegel stuff is very difficult. And sometimes my students, graduate students, say to me, like, I don't know what's going on here. I don't even know where to start with this stuff. And what I say to them, and what I would say to these freshmen, is, well, start with you. What do you care about this? How does this affect you? And once you go into it from that perspective, and you take sort of control of your own education, right, in a big way, then I do think that the kind of difficulty changes. You'll be more willing to grapple with difficult things. And I think that's what life is about, grappling with difficult things. Yeah, that's what I would say to them.
That's my new hashtag, grappling with difficult things. That's brilliant, Kimberly.
That's a long hashtag.
No, I'm for real. That's absolutely brilliant. So I would like you to set the record straight for the entire city of Muskegon for us, okay? There are a lot of people who don't have access to all of the avenues of media or of information. Mm-hmm. And once in a while, something will blip across even my news feed about the Southern Baptist Conference and critical race theory and different things. Will you explain to us in ways that we can understand what critical race theory is and what it is not? So it's an explanation we can share with other people?
Well, the first thing I will say is, technically, I do not work on critical race theory. I work on critical philosophy of race, which is it is in some ways a new discipline of philosophy. It's the journal that I edit is titled Critical Philosophy of Race. And the big difference, I think, is that critical race theory was initially started by legal scholars to think about things like discrimination in the workplace, so on and so forth. Folks like Kimberly Crenshaw and Derek Bell, who I'm thinking of there. So the difference with critical philosophy of race really is that I sort of look at the history of Western philosophy, and I try to do a couple things. I try to dispel the notion that European white thinkers were not talking about race and theorizing race and did not lay the foundation for anti-Blackness, because they did. And so that's a lot of my work, and other critical philosophers of race uncovered that, those things, the idea of race, anti-Blackness in philosophical theories, and sort of just bringing that to light. Now, you might think, well, why is that important? It is really important because folks like, I like to say, Immanuel Kant has a chokehold on philosophy, because so many people are Kantians in philosophy, but people will insist on reading his moral theory, this universal moral theory that he claimed to produce. But also he gave the justification for slavery in his writings, but they'll ignore that. They'll ignore that part and claim, oh, that wasn't essential to the theory. Yes, it's mind-blowing. Every time I'm at the American Philosophical Association, I'm talking to these Kantians, I'm like, you guys just lost it. Like, anyway, Hegel is also a racist. So I want to keep that very clear. So yeah, that's what I do. I look at those kinds of ideas because I really do want to bring them to light. The bigger goal, though, is for people to understand that these books, written by dead people in the 19th century, are ideas that still circulate today. Ideas of race are still prominent today. The fact that you go to the doctor and when you're filling out your little intake form, they're like, oh, which race are you? Where do you think those ideas come from? And so that's why I think it's really important. I think philosophy had a big hand in ongoing contemporary forms of racism, not just in the United States, but globally. So that's what I do. So
many of the people in the past who are now in positions of power or have been largely went to schools where they learned the philosophy that reinforced this systemic belief set that still goes on. So it wasn't just Orval Faubus and some of the other more blatant racists, it's embedded in the system.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah. I think that's a great way of putting it. There were a lot of blatant racists, though, but people seem to just tuck that stuff away, like, oh, we're not going to read that part of things, which I think is not just intellectually sloppy, it's dishonest. You know what I mean? If we really want to sort out if a moral theory is worth taking seriously today, then I do think we need to confront the fact that that theorist had some unsavory parts of their thinking. I mean, Immanuel Kant didn't even think that women had the same level of rationality. It sounds wild and crazy, but people still treat women like that today, right? We still only make 75 cents on the dollar for the same job as a man. So
how does the old boys club at these conventions or these different gatherings, when you speak, how do they respond to you? Because I'm sitting here thinking, I'm preach it up, preacher, but I don't think they're saying that.
Yeah.
How do they respond?
There is a shift right now in philosophy. So when I'm in Hegel circles, yeah, that's like, if you've ever seen the biggest collection of white guys who are nerds who are working on one specific topic, that would be like any Hegel conference. So of course, when I show up there, everyone's like, where did you come from? That's usually people's general reaction to me in general, not just white people, just people. Where did you come from? But yeah, I do think, though, I will say this about my peers. I do think that they take me very seriously. Some of my closest friends, actually philosophical friends, are white guys who work on Hegel. So in that sense, I feel heard and validated, but there are a contingency of males in these spaces that abuse the spaces, that are sort of unaware of their privilege, who act on that privilege. We recently, actually it was a couple years ago, I'm gonna send you this article, but Anita Allen became the first Black woman president of the American Philosophical Association a couple years ago. And she did this interview where she talked about her experience in philosophy. And she said that, and this was so striking to me, she said that she rarely was not sexually harassed at philosophy conferences, at the American Philosophical Association, by peers. And, you know, it's so striking to me because she's absolutely right. There is this contingency of male philosophers who use and abuse and dominate spaces in a particular way. So learning how to navigate the spaces has been one of the biggest challenges of my career. I had a very hard year last year due to some interactions that happened at a conference. And you would think I come to a conference to give a paper and to interact with my peers, because you know you want to be accepted by your peers. The last thing you want to be is sexually harassed, or, you know, I'm here to give a paper, right? So it's very difficult, but I don't think it's more difficult than women who work in other spaces, because this is a very common narrative. That's why Me Too was such a big movement, right? It was powerful because suddenly realized every woman is having these kinds of interactions. It's terrible.
Well, and I think you hit on a piece that I know for myself, going to a professional conference and having safety concerns has never even crossed my mind, aside from crossing a busy street in Chicago. And those are the elements that people don't hear and don't believe, or try to turn into, like the Me Too movement's a powerful movement, but people try to trivialize it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm hoping you're going to write 2 books then, one that's on Hegel or something, which I probably won't read, but
2 books I'm working on. I'm working on a book on Hegel's racism. I decided that 2 days ago, but my book writing coach is like, why don't you finish this book first? I'm like, you're right. I am going to finish this book, but I do have some other books in mind.
I think a book about you would sell. The Hegel book will probably 5 people will buy it, right?
Right.
It's 5 solid people who 3 of them will probably be family members.
But I think your
story,
other
2 will probably be you guys.
I think your story would be a blockbuster.
Yeah, it would be. Yes.
But I don't know that my story is, particularly unique.
6th and Mason to Marquette University. That's
an
path.
40 out of 10.
That's a very specific narrative. But I mean to say, like, I'm actually not a person. When you asked me to do this, I'm like, oh gosh, I hate talking about myself. Mostly because I don't really think that I don't think of my life as that interesting. I'm mostly interested in other people's lives. I'm very nosy in that way. But no, I don't think I would write a book about myself. But I would want to write about what it means to be a Black woman philosopher in some way, and the perspective on philosophy that I have, and what kind of keeps me going, because it's been a little bit hard last year. But, it's been like pandemic. So it's like, I can't tell if it's the pandemic or like every other terrible thing that's happening. And then of course, George Floyd happened, and that was very depressing and discouraging. And
so my guess is from your news feed, you won't be doing a TED Talk.
No, I'm not gonna do a TED Talk. I don't know that I have anything that could be fit into 15 minutes that would not be convoluted. But no, I was just genuinely interested, because I sort of suspect that part of the popularity of TED Talks has to do with this neoliberal university agenda to sort of get rid of professors, like get rid of my job, you know. And so
right here.
you can just listen to 15-minute TED Talks on whatever topic you choose.
If you're listening, there, she said it here.
We actually have a TEDx here, and one of my students is on the TED committee, and she was asking me, she's like, oh, you should give a TED Talk. I'm like, have you not been following me all semester? Like, I have said nothing concise all semester. So,
but I'm serious, Kimberly. I think any human being who can juggle Hegel in one hand and what good turkey knuckles are in the other, that's a person worthy of buying a book in hardcover, mind you, in hardcover, and reading it from cover to cover.
Hardcovers are expensive.
No one has that spin but you. And
Picture book.
That's what's remarkable.
You don't see your narrative as unique because you've lived it and you've been in it your whole entire life.
Yeah.
There are lots of little girls living on 6th and Mason corners that don't hear that narrative if it's not widely available.
No, that's right. That's true. I just mean to say I try not to be a narcissist. But you're right. No, that people should hear at least, especially my professional narrative. Yeah, so I do think you guys are right in that sense. But it sounds like, Kyrgyl, I should be signing you up to do all my book promotion stuff.
I don't, yeah.
Actually, no, it's so funny because when I was talking about the book, which I should say something about the book, because the book is about W.E.B. Du Bois. I'm calling it right now W.E.B. Du Bois's meta philosophy, The Truth of Race. And I'm really far along in it. I'm about 75% done with the manuscript.
Oh, wow.
And then I'm at the point where I'm thinking about a good press. I think I picked a press and an editor that I like to work with. But anyway, so the book is about Du Bois's view of philosophy, given that he is a race theorist. He was the most prolific race theorist of the 20th century. So obviously for African Americans, he as an intellectual means a lot. He often gets read as a sociologist. He was trained in history. He was the first African American to get a PhD from Harvard. But yeah, he went to Berlin. He worked with German thinkers. So the German intellectual culture and the theories in general had a big influence on his intellectualism. So obviously that's why I have a lot of interest in him as a figure. But I really want to respond to a conundrum, I think, in philosophy, which I was sort of mentioning to you guys earlier. But the conundrum is this: I don't think that contemporary philosophers, and that's any contemporary philosopher, meaning ethicists, metaphysicians, epistemologists, whatever it is that you do, social and political philosophers, I don't know that we spend enough time thinking about what it is that we do, what it means to philosophize. And so I think Du Bois's perspective bears on that question heavily. And so when he's considering race, I think it's indicating that philosophers should philosophize about things that matter.
Yeah.
That matter. Race matters. Black lives matter. And that's what Du Bois kind of emphasizes. So that's what I mean by meta philosophy, sort of centering race inquiry and the experiences of Black people in philosophical discourses and what that means for philosophical methodology. That's what the book is about.
I wanted to share with you, I don't know if you read it, The Souls of Black Folks by W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yes, his most famous work.
And that's speaking to what you're talking about, all these angles of these people that's from this ethnic group that are able to collectively speak from their own perspective of how America is treating them in those spaces. But also got an opportunity when I went to Ghana to visit the museum that they have of his home in Ghana. And he had his stuff from Harvard.
Right, yeah, because yes. he dies there.
Yes, and it's a great institute, but you're speaking exactly. W.E. Du Bois' work is important when it comes to that narrative of being shared and getting back to your narrative. That's why it needs to be, your book needs to be out, because it's a reflection for someone to say, hey, and it's a good way to mirror when you're reading somebody else's work. Like, I'm crazy about Jeffrey Canada when it comes from an African-American perspective for myself, because I'm an educator and I chose that all my life. So when I read his work, I see myself going through the crime in the 80s and seeing those perspectives of where he's at. I'm like, because I'm really big on policy for education. Like, you want to read work, but you want to say, can this be done? So by a young lady looking at Dr. Harris, it can be done. And it gives you the potential to see beyond. But like you said, the soul of Black folks, I got that book right on my shelf at home, and it's a great collective work of people and their experiences from all works of life and how they build. But speaking back to the racist part of America, I'm a big proponent. I really studied the Holocaust for years because I spent a lot of money on the Holocaust when it comes to Marvel, when it comes to the comics. And I noticed that when I was studying eugenics, they called the Ivy League colleges and say, hey, how did you create this system of hate? And they got it from these private institutions. And they say, we did it with the Africans. You can do the same thing in the Holocaust. And they got that information from America when they did it. So when it comes, and we've been studying a lot of this stuff in our program, Deeper Learning Conferences, and talking about how racism is and how it's this institution. We was just looking at a document and was talking about these things: perfectionism, the concentration of power, the right to suffer, individualism, progress is bigger and more. Just topics that we've been studying as a whole program, so that make sure we don't function or we don't take the element out of our kids where they can, like Tom said, where they can be able to speak for themselves and not apologize or code switch, because their space is important in this world. And having you on the days helps us stretch our narrative at MCEC so we can collectively be this Justice League for our community.
Yeah, it's real. I like the way you put that, because I've been thinking a lot recently, because I've been designing this course with one of my colleagues in theology. Actually, it's about systemic racism. And I was reading, because you just mentioned eugenics. George Fredrickson has this book, this little book, actually. It's called Racism, A Short History. And he talks about precisely what you're talking about, the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, how it was in some ways a model for Jim Crow America and apartheid South Africa, right? But the way he weaves together those three different narratives, the German narrative, the American narrative, and the South African narrative, I think in that short book is quite fascinating.
What's the title again?
It's called Racism, A Short History.
Okay.
But yeah, The Souls of Black Folks is a classic. I think it's required reading. Not, it does so many different things. It has 14 little essays in it, but it's such beautiful writing. It's striking how beautiful the writing is. It's been reprinted, I don't know how many times, but it's an American classic. It's not just an African-American classic. It's an American classic.
Yep. So we've been submitting. So last year, I know I submitted our program to the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute at Harvard. I'm going to do it every year. I'm going to keep on submitting our program so we can become fellows of the Institute of W.E.B.
That's such a good idea.
Our whole team at MCEC, because we just feel that it's important that this narrative is expanded, where people like you can be celebrated working with us, and we can always tap on people like yourself. So, man.
Well, if you need help with that, because I think you would have to write it like a sort of like a semi-grant proposal kind of thing.
Yes.
Whatever. I'm not necessarily good at writing grants, but I'm good at the Du Bois stuff.
Okay. So yeah, I'll tap on you, because every year I apply to we didn't do it this year, but next year I will be applying again. So we will connect.
Nice.
So Kimberly, I know that you have class not too far away. What questions have we not asked, or what things are on your heart to share, things that we've missed that you feel like our audience here in Muskegon needs to hear?
Oh, I have a difficult question. How are you guys tackling systemic racism?
I'm glad you brought that one up.
I'll go at it.
So, this is a long story, and we can only speak for us, right? So we've been doing the work to challenge ourselves. Chauncey accessed and hit on a couple of topics. We've been hitting the conferences and doing the reading and doing the research to figure out how are the things that we do as a secondary education building part of the white supremacist system, and what things how do we need to change our understanding and the way we perceive things to functionally change the way we do, not just to say, oh, we hired so-and-so, so now we're good, because that's false. So the document Chauncey referenced speaks to how we're looking at redesign of content delivery around competency-based education. How are ways in which kids can show mastery of what they've learned, and giving them both options. Of course, you need to be able to do writing well, but there are other ways to engage people and give them agency in their learning. So for example, maybe the research paper becomes one where they choose a community issue, and we figure out how to support them in investigative reports rather than doing a book report on Alice in Wonderland, which doesn't matter for anything. It's off the top of my head, but I mean, Chauncey, did I sum it?
I'll help you out. We know this is how we work. We're a four-headed monster. So if I don't know it, Paul knows it, or Tom knows it. So I'm gonna say this. One way we're doing it is we're going at it with governance through Michigan State to help us have this one voice. All right. Mm-hmm. Secondly, we're approaching policy. So we're considering myself, considering going back to school to make sure we have policy education in space so we can make sure our program doesn't disappear as we grow and expand, because we're really here to fight the predominantly white institutions where we don't marginalize our kids and our population. So that's secondly. But then third, we're putting social emotional learning in the front with, and we call this concept here, city of school. And I'm gonna give you this phrase right here, because you say you lived in a one mile radius. This phrase was said, what happens in the street stays in the streets. Unfortunately, that's a toxic phrase because you learn things in the streets that can mess your life up. So we were talking the other day and saying, hey, why not, if they bring these phrases up that our kids belong to the streets, let's show them what entities are in the streets, build relationships with these entities through policy so we can function in a capacity where our kids can get opportunities and they can see what goes on in the streets go on in the school. So that's our reach, where we break down the racism. So when our students are somewhere, they say, oh, that's students with Mr. Wims or Paul or Mr. Ellis at MCEC. Those kids have been working with us for several years. Let's get them an internship. Let's get them this opportunity because they've been in these spaces as an apprentice first or an internship. So we're really trying to break down barriers and push down walls, but doing it in a structured way where when the pushback comes, the community is there to say, no, we want this for our people. So that's, in a nutshell, that's how it.
Also, I mean, people always talk about street smarts like they're not valuable. Street smarts are really valuable. I wish I had more of them.
Integrity, just being able to know what's right from wrong and the ethics in it is just.
Right, yeah. How you apply the skills is, what needs to be shifted a little bit.
So our mini course up in here. She done gave us a mini course.
I told you she'd turn the questioning back on us because she's a philosopher and that's who she is. And
I'm better at asking questions than answering them as a philosopher.
So in a nutshell, we've really looked to like the community action centers of the 60s and 70s, the cultural wealth that was talked about like in Dr. Bettina Love's book. We're really trying to look at how do we become, well, I'll just be honest with you, our unofficial motto is buy back the block from Rick Ross. Our goal is to get kids on a path to purchase property so they can't be ignored in our capitalist society at their own city commission meetings.
Yeah. There's a lot of building going on. I saw, because I was home a couple weeks ago. I saw a lot of building going on downtown. Downtown Muskegon has changed a lot. Gentrification, maybe? Is that a good word for it? It's a word. It's probably more complex than that, but yeah, it has changed a lot. And I noticed the houses that are being built particularly in the neighborhood that I grew up in. But the houses seem to be overpriced for the neighborhood. So I'm sort of confused about, what the plan there is.
I can share with you. I think what they're gonna do is how condos do when it comes to zoning.
Mm-hmm.
They'll lock that price in like it's a gated community. So then whatever properties they absorb after that, when it comes to rental properties, they won't lose value. So, you have an association of homes in the condo community. Oh, these worth 300,000. They can allocate that through policy and say these houses on this block never going to lose their value. It's going to be a Renaissance zone. So you'll retain your value. I actually helped someone that's from an urban neighborhood get into a space, into one of those homes, be able to qualify for that home. So they can afford it, but they didn't see themselves affording it first. But like you said, it's all about how you zone it. And when you think about zoning,
there's a lot of zoning or rezoning going on right now.
That's the word. So you remember the red zoning when it comes to redlining. So now they're flipping it and doing a gentrification way, where they say, well, these houses can be in this area, but it's going to retain its value no matter what. So you can have a house next to it that's worth 50,000, but this one's going to be 249 or 300. That's crazy, but wow, look how people can do things. The unwritten word or the written word.
Man, it's written down. It's definitely written down. Yes. Do you guys I don't have any more questions. Kurt disappeared.
Yes, he apologizes. He said he had to split for another meeting. So he figured out how to be in 2 Zooms at once. So
yeah, but I don't have any more questions. So I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes preparing for my class. But it's the last day. I'm giving my concluding lecture today. So it's going to be a lot of, stage presence, I should say. No heavy lifting. But it was really, thanks for having me on. It was really great to talk to all of you.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
She was deep. I didn't know she came out swinging. Narratives is getting deeper and deeper as we do this. I think you're muted.
I'm muted. Yes, every time, every week, right? Every week. It's phenomenal. So I've been smelling something the whole time that we've been sitting here, Brent. So I'm going to turn around and grab it off the table.
Yeah, I got mine too.
So we are, by the way, she's electric. She is absolutely electric. And look forward to big things coming from Dr. Harris and with her books and whatnot. For the food section this week, we got the second restaurant with a drive-through. And I think we've done nothing against restaurants with drive-throughs, but I think we've done a pretty good job of getting a taste of Muskegon, if you will. I know that somebody already owns that phrase, but we've moved around and tasted a lot of things. Today, we're going to one of my favorites, and it has been a go-to of mine for a very long time, and that is the famous recipe of none other than our good buddy Lee. Lee's famous recipe. Now, I got a few things here. One is I usually get the jumbo chicken strips, okay? And I get them spicy because I'm a spicy guy. And these things are massive. And they give you 3 good strips. I got some potato wedges. And the only decent dipping sauce, or the only dipping sauce that should exist on the planet is this Chipotle Ranch. It ain't bad. Check that out. But I also got all these little, and I know Paul is a huge Frank's fan, as am I, okay? However, when you're eating chicken from the famous recipe of Lee, these Texas Pete's, these go a long way, particularly when you order their delicacy, the gizzards, which some people take them or leave them. I take them. And so what did you get, Chauncey?
I'm eating right now. I'm glad you were a brave soul to get in that line, because every time I ride past Lee's, the line is long. I can tell you, like, I'm like, what are they doing to their food? Every day, their line is long. So I got the gizzards, man. I mean, they're good. They're got the hot sauce and honey on them with some coleslaw, and the biscuit nice and a light lunch, little cheat day, meal, little snack. Hey, can't beat it. Light and crispy, not heavy on me. I'm enjoying myself for my little lunch break.
What did you get, Tom?
Well, I went with the oven roasted 3-piece. So I got a thigh, a wing, and a leg, and I'm enjoying it. Some wedges, and I'm good to go.
I agree. And I tell you what, there hasn't been, the other thing that's really good there is their sweet tea. I don't know if you guys ever driven down that lane before, but their sweet tea is really good. Their coleslaw is good. The line was long when I pulled up, and I was concerned because I'm looking at the clock. I knew we had Dr. Kimberly Ann Harris on today. I didn't want to miss a moment of that. And so I pulled in, and the line was swift. And so you can imagine one person ordering food for all four of us, how there was a lot of food. And so we got to the end, and I'm ordering. She says, anything else? I said, yep. And so I get to the very end, and I heard her take a deep breath, the young lady that took my order. She says, is that all? And I said, for heaven's sakes, yes. And they moved swift. I was in and out of the line in under 10 minutes, and we ordered a little bit of everything. PK got the 4-piece wing meal, and then he got a bunch of sides to go with it. And they got it all up in a hurry, and it's good. And I've been sitting here torturing myself, smelling it for the last, hour and a half, because you have to go get it early and get back in whatever window work permits. So definitely happy with Lee's. Feel free to check them out. They do typically employ a lot of our students, which is a cool thing. They hook them up with jobs pretty regularly, and they've always, I know that, from the football end of it, Coach Fairfield had a good relationship with the owner, and anytime, a player came to us and said, I need to get a job, Lee's was one of the first places that we called, and they were always great to work with us. So feel free to check those guys out. It ain't bad.
Awesome. Chauncey, you ready to wrap us up?
Yeah, I think she gave us the true success lesson too. Everything she gave us.
It was all packaged in there. Summary of this morning and a call to move forward, and everything in one.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, you can't ask for anything else. Well, here we go. I'm still chewing on food. Well, that's the end of our live hour. Thanks for tuning in to the MCEC Fam Show, the place where the center of your child's education is magnified in a collaborating community.